It's 9 minutes past when we should have started. We're here. I've got lots of exciting things to show you today. Welcome. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join me. I'm excited. Got some demos to show, got some future stuff to show. I think I had a little bit for everyone. So away we go. This is our VertiGIS Studio Road Ahead webinar for February the 2nd, 2023. I am your host, Cam Barnard. I'm a product director for VertiGIS Studio, as well as the head of product management for VertiGIS Studio. And so I get the joy of showing you all this cool stuff. I generally put these webinars into the format of kind of a past, present, future. And so we're going to kick it off with kind of things that have come out recently. But what I find is sometimes, we release a lot of software. Some of these products are releasing versions every 2 months. It's really easy to miss stuff. So this is my opportunity to call out for you things that I think are worthy of pointing out. And some of them I guarantee you don't know because they're super sneaky. So to kick it off, I want to talk briefly, I won't spend a long time on this, about our Global Doc Center. We just launched a brand new Global Doc Center at docs.vertigis.com. Why do you care? That's a great question. I'll show you why you care. So this is the landing page, the web property of this. You will see this grow and change over time. You can see already right here under Build Your Own, you can see things like VertiGIS Inline and all the regular VertiGIS Studio things that you're used to seeing. And anytime you use these, you ultimately are going to end up back on docs.vertigisstudio.com. So if you're already going to docs.vertigisstudio.com, you can keep going there because you ultimately will end up there. But here's the thing, for a long, long time, I have been talking to you about some of the benefits that you are beginning to see as customers of VertiGIS Studio around the fact that this is being used in other places. So just as an example, let me go over to some of our new utilities products. You can see, first of all, if you are using some of the other products within VertiGIS, you now have a single documentation portal that you can go to find what it is you're looking for. You can start to see some of the new documentation that's coming out for the new products. But it also gives you really good visibility as a VertiGIS Studio customer on where existing VertiGIS Studio products are being used in some of these new products. So I thought that was interesting and worth sharing briefly. You're welcome. We will continue on. The second big new thing that I wanted to announce, and some of our partners have known this was coming for a little while, but thought it was worth calling out here, is that we have a brand new SaaS region online today. It's not 100% complete yet. There's still a couple products missing that will show up there in the next few days, but at apps.vertigisstudio.eu, you can now go to that landing page to go to our SaaS environment. So why does that matter to you if you're not in the EU? Obviously, if you're in the EU, you're clapping and cheering and very excited about this announcement. But if you're not, why does it matter? So just thought I would refresh a little bit about our SaaS environment. So up to this point, the VertiGIS SaaS environment was really static content for the most part that lived up in a content delivery network or similar thing. And when you hit it, it would bring that down to your local machine, run in a local web browser, and really everything you were doing was actually running on your local browser. All you were really getting from the SaaS environment, for the most part, was just the stuff to download and then load in that local browser. All data at rest was stored in your Esri portal or ArcGIS Online. And there was a few cases where there was transient data that would go up to the SaaS environment to generate a print report and then generate a link for a PDF, which you could then download to your local machine. And that transient data that was sent up existed really only long enough for us to complete the transaction. And the output of that was there for 20 or 30 minutes to give you a chance to download it, and then would get cleaned up behind the scenes as well. So generally speaking, your data always lived on your Esri portal in your local environment or in ArcGIS Online. But with the upcoming release, and we'll talk more about VertiGIS Studio Search, That changes because you now have a SaaS-based product that is behind the scenes creating configuration and indexes in a commercial search engine with a subset, at least, of some of your data in order to provide that SaaS search environment. Now, of course, this can also be installed on-prem, but if you were running it in SaaS, some amount of your data was stored in the cloud. So that was brand new. We had never done that before with any of our other products. So we had some new thinking to do. And for customers who are in the EU, they needed a data center in the EU where that would get stored. So the gist of it is this. If you are a North American customer, generally speaking, you're going to want to go to apps.vertigistudio.com. The data center is in North America. The URL is .com. And if you begin using VertiGIS Studio Search, your data is staying in North America. If you are a European or an EU customer, you can begin now using apps.vertigistudio.eu. And when you begin to use something like a search product, the data center that backs that is in the EU. So while we did this, it was also an opportunity for us to just kind of look at our SaaS environment creation process. It was mostly automated, but there were a few manual steps. So throughout this process, we've now got this to 100% infrastructure as code, which literally means, again, to your benefit, disaster recovery, consistency, traceability, all those things are now in place where quite literally at the push of a button, we can rebuild one of these environments in the cloud. So thought that was worth mentioning, thought it was interesting. If you have questions, of course, I love your questions. Let's talk about other recent things. So this is already out there. Let's talk a bit about workflow. A few noteworthy things on recent development around workflow. First of all, there is now available to you a public CityWorks activity pack. Now, this has been floating around internally here. We've been using it for services projects, and even some of our customers have been using it, but it wasn't possible for us to make it public up to this point. We finally resolved the last little dotted I's and crossed T's around some of the licensing stuff to enable us to actually make this workflow activity pack to talk to the CityWorks asset management system public. So you can now find this directly on GitHub under the VertiGIS site, and it works very similarly to all the other workflow activity packs, but I just wanted to call out for you that that was now public and it was now available. Also recently noteworthy on workflow, a really nice little quality of life improvement where you can drag an activity onto an existing line. I'll show that to you in a moment. Workflow server now has what I would call an operational file retention policy. So when you're running workflow server, obviously there's a server involved. We're creating log files, temporary data, and the like. And a few of you made such heavy use of workflow server that even the default file retention policies would get overwhelmed and you ultimately would fill up your hard drives, which isn't good for a server. So we've enhanced this quite substantially, and now you can configure a lot more around these file retention policies, basically just to make sure that we're cleaning up old logs and old things so that your hard drive never fills up. So that's new and noteworthy. And then lastly, a new accordion style for section types for forms, which again, I'm actually going to demo for you right this second. So here we go. Here we are in workflow. And the first thing I wanted to quickly show you was you do have a new style in your section styles for accordion type. And so what does that look like? I'm glad you asked. Let me show you. The gist of it is this: you can have multiple sections, and as we call this in software development, I'm not quite sure why, this is an accordion style, which means only one of these sections can be opened at a time. So the minute I interact with and open section 2, section 1 collapses, and the minute I open and interact with section 3, section 2 collapses. There were a number of UX experiences that customers and services and partners were asking for, where this kind of default behavior was highly, highly desirable. So we went ahead and added it. The second thing I wanted to show you really quick, if you've done any amount of work in workflow, I guarantee there has been a point in time when you have done this. I have a new thing, maybe it was a log that I wanted to do, and I drag it on, and then I do this. One click, one keyboard, 3 drag, 4 drag. Hey, look at that. I wired my log into my existing workflow so that I could debug it or troubleshoot it to get some additional information. What we've done as a quality of life improvement in the latest version of workflow is you can now simply take this and drag it directly onto the transition, and bada bing, bada boom, it is wired in for you. So saves quite a bit of time and energy. We just thought it was helpful, and it's like one of those little things. If you do enough in workflow, it kind of drives you nuts. So we thought it was time to do something about it. You're most welcome. Let's keep going. So that was what's new and noteworthy on workflow. Let's talk about what's new and noteworthy on Experience Builder. So as you know, you can take VertiGIS Studio workflow, printing, and reporting, and you can run those products inside ArcGIS Experience Builder. There is some new and noteworthy things here. I'll go through each of them. The big theme is this. We are continuing, and you'll see this in the future as well, we're continuing to make the integration between Experience Builder and the widgets and all the interface tighter so that you can do more useful things with it. So most recently, we do have full support for Experience Builder 1.10. So if you were looking for that, waiting for it, wondering when it was coming out, it's out. That also includes support for the latest version of workflow, which is 5.31. But what are some of those more integration changes? Well, workflow, custom workflow activities are now fully supported. When we first released the Experience Builder workflow widgets, it was a little tricky to figure out how to get custom workflow activities to run in a way that Esri's framework would not get angry about having custom stuff running. We've got that all figured out now, so custom activities are fully supported. And this is interesting. So custom Experience Builder widgets. So if you build your own widget in Experience Builder, that widget can now invoke workflows. And in the other direction, custom Experience Builder widgets can now also consume outputs of workflows. So you want to run a workflow and then have that feed data into a custom Experience Builder widget. Those paths which previously weren't working are now working. And you'll see a little bit more of what's coming on the future of Experience Builder development, but that is my update for you on Experience Builder. And no, I'm not going to demo it. It's a little too technical. Here we go. Analytics. I think it was in our last Road Ahead webinar together, we had the opportunity to introduce or announce the initial 1.0 release of VertiGIS Studio Analytics. New and noteworthy recent development, Analytics 1.1 has already been released. There were some new panels and data that we really wanted to get in for the mobile product around downloading content, both with MMPKs as well as with map areas. We also need to do some work around security providers, supporting the Esri Identity Security Provider, and giving you a bit more control about controlling your groups and domains and who has access. So all that work is done. It's recently been released, and I wanted to take a second. I've got a screenshot here so that if you're looking at the slides later, you can see it, but I'm actually going to briefly show this to you. So here we are in Analytics. You can see I am looking at Studio Mobile Apps. I'm in Capital City and specifically looking at my production environment. Just for kind of interest's sake, I'm in the trends, so things that have happened over time section. And as you begin to work through this and you scroll down, you're going to start to see some new panels and some new data that we've added in 1.1. One of those is around downloads around map areas. Now, this data goes from the 27th to the 31st, so I'm just going to do a quick adjustment. Also to show you how quick and responsive analytics is. If you use GeoCortex analytics, that would have taken quite a lot longer to take your input and re-render. So we continue to try and make sure that it is very, very quick. So what are we actually looking at here? We're looking at how many times were map areas downloaded over this period of time. And I'm going to just switch it up, and I'm going to do columns. Let's start by day, or even by hour. And what I'm really interested, column by hour, here we go, is, hey, what was the average min-max duration? So I can actually get in here, and I actually want to, maybe group this by names, but really what I'm trying to see is, are there outliers? Are there things that were inconsistent? And I can see on average, it's taking anywhere from 35 to 45 seconds for users to download the data. Now, there's a lot more that I can drill into here. I can look at network versus Wi-Fi downloads, for example, see what kinds of differences there are there. There's quite a lot of data behind the scenes that you can use. But the other kinds of things we thought you would want to know, in addition to how long did it take users to download, did they experience any errors downloading those map areas or their MMPKs, was also getting into things like updates. So I'm interested in the number of updates that were done on map areas. So people did just download them and look at them. They maybe added something, removed something, edited something, those kinds of things. So I can see that, there were 14 updates on that particular map area on the 30th of January, for example. And again, you can drill in or even look at the tabular data to see the very specific examples of what it was that changed. And then there were other things we wanted you to be able to investigate and look at, which is, for example, hey, when people were sending data back, what was it that they were doing? Like how many ads on the average send? So I'm out in the field, I do a bunch of stuff, and then I click I want to send this data back to the organization. What's the average number of additions or deletions or updates that's occurring? Are people getting errors, for example, when they do that? You can see we did get some when we were doing some of our testing. Some of it was on purpose, but nevertheless, you can see those kinds of things. So I'll probably stop the demo there, but needless to say, the big idea and the big theme is we want our mobile users, our end users, to have a great experience with VertiGIS Studio Mobile. And one of the most common questions we were getting from our customers was, my users are telling me it's taking a really long time to download the data. Well, now we're tracking it all. We can see it in analytics. We can interact with it. We can understand what's going on. And of course, that gives us an opportunity to adjust and react. All right, continuing on. Let's talk a little bit more about mobile. So some recent stuff that's new and noteworthy in mobile. A lot of new receivers added. Bad Elf GNS receivers were added fairly recently. A couple of new Leica receivers were added recently. I just showed you some of the new integration with analytics that's coming from mobile. And we also updated recently to the 100.15 of what is now known as the ArcGIS Maps SDK, previously known as the ArcGIS Runtime SDK. VertiGIS Studio Access Control. All right, this should really pique your interest. This is one of those things that if it's of interest to you, boy, is it of interest to you. And if it's not, well, then you can check to see how many likes you got in your latest social media update. This is not new development per se, but we discovered, validated, and proved a really interesting new use case with VertiGIS Studio Access Control. So current VertiGIS Studio Access Control, you can do this with. What was it? We realized that in the Esri ecosystem, generally speaking, if something is a feature service that is editable and you are of a user type that is allowed to edit that feature service, that version feature service, that in Esri's ecosystem, you can now do everything and anything. But some of our customers wanted more fine-grained control. For example, there is a really common use case where the default version of that version feature editing, you don't ever want anyone to manually change or update from the field in particular. You want all edits to be done in their own version of, for example, a feature layer, and then there is a manual process for validating, doing QA, and then incorporating that into the default viewer. So the Esri ecosystem doesn't give you that, but using access control on top of the Esri ecosystem, you can use access control to do very specific security rules. These users, these groups can access these versions. Maybe no one can access default. This other group can access this other group can access that. So if that more fine-grained control of version editing is of interest to you, there is a solution. It's called access control. Maybe you already have access control and now you know you can accomplish this. But that was worth calling out and mentioning. Let's talk about web. So VertiGIS Studio Web, new and noteworthy recent development, snapping. Yay, we finally got you snapping. I know there was a lot of excitement around this one. Starred results, adding ad layer support. We did a bunch of different work on ad layer support, from basically getting it to the place where you could actually look at all the layers and pick the one you wanted, to doing some filtering, and now most recently to being able to add multiple layers at once. And then I demoed in the last road ahead some of the enhancements and changes around results display, of which there were many. So I want to show you a couple of things here. Many of you may have already seen snapping. I'm going to do a short demo of it because I'm going to try and show you a couple things you might not have known, and just call out from verbal and demo wise a couple of things that I think are worth emphasizing. And I'm also going to show you a little bit of the layer add stuff. So here we go on web. Next tab over. Add layer example. All right, hopefully this is still live and active, and I will kick it off with this. So this is our standard add layer. Nah, that's what I thought. I need to refresh my token, but we're in there now, so away we go. Going to go to my organizational content, and I'm going to look for a layer. I've forgotten the name, so I'm going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Layer list test, this is what I'm looking for. So in one of the more recent versions, you now have this interface where you can see all the different layers. There's some points, there's some polygons. I can filter this list, to get to very specific things very, very quickly. Select the layer I'm looking for, click OK, and it will, of course, now add that layer into my map. So that's been around for a version and a half or so, but I did call this out in the last release and in the release notes, and I just wanted to emphasize it. If I go into my I want to menu, all right, buckle up your seat belts, put on your flak jackets and your crash helmets. We're going into edit JSON. So that default command looks like this. You're doing a default portal choose layers and a default map add layers. Okay, that's exciting, but if you want to, you can customize this. And so the customization of this is to turn this into a called command and add an argument called allow multiple true. I have the syntax for this in the release notes. It's really easy to go just copy and paste it in here. But what does that give you as a different experience? Well, it gives you experience that looks like this. We are going to go find that same data. And because we invoked this differently, instead of an interface that requires me to choose one, which is often what you're going to want, we get an interface that gives you the ability to select multiple, or even just to select them all and add them at the same time. So I wanted to kind of show you that and make sure you were aware that it existed. Let's talk about snapping. So many of you probably have already given this a try. I'm going to use line drawing. I'm going to turn snapping on. And I just want to call a few things out for you. So I'm going to snap here from this fire hydrant across the water up here. And what I want to show you, first of all, if you didn't notice it, the snapping reticule around the point. You can see right now it's purple, then it changes to blue, then it changes to red. And what we've done is, as you're coming into areas, you can see a fire hydrant and a building and a water line all similar. You don't necessarily always want to zoom in. So by seeing that that is red, I know that that is selecting the fire hydrant. It's picking up the color of the feature behind the scenes. So we'll go ahead and add a line there. And I'm just going to quickly add another line for snapping. The other thing I want to show you that you may not have noticed right away is anytime you're doing snapping, you can always switch the state with the Alt key. So if I hold down the Alt key, you can see now snapping isn't happening. If I let go, it is. And the same way is true. If I don't have snapping turned on and I'm doing just a bunch of drawing and then I just want to snap to one thing, I can hold the Alt key down to toggle snapping on briefly. So let's go ahead and snap to that other fire hydrant there. And the last thing I just want to demo real quick on snapping is, in addition to snapping to features, if you haven't already discovered this, you can also snap to markup or measurement. So that is a valid snapping target. And in fact, I can come in here and snap kind of right smack dab in the middle of that. So snapping is here. If you haven't played with it yet, please do. Love your feedback. There is still a little bit more coming on the snapping side of things, but I'm really pleased that we've got the out-of-the-box capabilities in place for you. Continuing on, hopefully I'm not going too fast, but I'm conscious of the fact that we started a bit late. So this is present stuff. This is either days away or a week or two away. The first thing I want to highlight for you is VertiGIS Studio Search. We are literally days away from releasing the 1.0 version of VertiGIS Studio Search. I do, however, want to just set expectations. What are we releasing? What's still coming? All of it. And I'll talk about future a little bit later here. So the initial 1.0 version product I said here has been released. It's done. We're in the process of releasing it literally a day or two away. It is a really solid search engine that speaks Esri. It's available both SaaS and on-prem. And it has a dedicated search designer, similar to what you've seen with all the other VertiGIS Studio Designer products that let you completely configure that search. And we've fully documented this as well, so you've got pretty good documentation. So, but be aware, integration of that great search experience into web is currently done manually, and it is currently workflow based. So what does that mean? What it means is this: if you are super keen and you really want to try this out, you should expect that you're going to follow some instructions. We've given you a couple of workflows to work with. We've made it as easy as we possibly can, but it's not just click a button and this thing is wired together. Now, you'll see future, that's where we're going. But today it is actually quite a pleasant experience once you get it integrated into web. We've given you 2 sample workflows. One of them is a truly invisible, fully integrated experience where you use the search in web the way you always did, and behind the scenes, it's combining results from VertiGIS Studio Search configurations that you've created with the, we'll call it global search backed by Esri, and it puts all that together and returns it to you. But we've also given you a workflow that is an example of what you were to turn the existing search off and give your users a more guided search experience. Now, rest assured, we're going way beyond this. This is the 1.0 release. You can expect a 1.1 and a 1.2 release in the next 2 months, 4 months, respectively. And we think it's somewhere around Q2 that we'll have all the first-class web integration done. So if you don't want to do manual work, hey, it's not far away. Just hold off, wait till we get there, and you will have an experience where in Web Designer, you can literally just go in and say, I want to use VertiGIS Studio Search on this layer, and you don't have to do anything, and it just works. That's where we're going. We're not there yet. Workflow. So this is stuff that is super close to being done. Sorry, it's not workflow, that's mobile. I should know the difference. Really, I should. We've made some changes around how map areas are downloaded just to get around some edge cases. So basically when things come down, they immediately also invoke an update. There were a few edge cases where they would be out of sync, and we didn't ever want that to happen to you. We've also got a really great new fairly low level command that lets you change the color of your location dot and your accuracy information. Why? Because we've got some cool use cases where, maybe you're doing location-based tracking, plotting a line along the edge of the boundary by someone walking in the field. You may want to see the location color change state, change color as you're doing that or not doing that, as an example. And we've made some changes to the text component to give you some additional options around the background. There were some very good use cases around putting text on the map where you actually needed a little bit of a background in order to make it stand out. So those are some things that are coming very, very soon in mobile. That release is due to come out mid-February, so 2 weeks or so. Let's talk about web. What is coming in web? The very next release, so the next release again, middle of February. Data linking, excited to finally deliver the first actual data linking use cases to you. This is the one-to-many as a related data use case that we're delivering this time around. Also some highlight generalization control. That's really abstract language. I'm going to show that to you so you know what I'm talking about. Of course, we're also adding editing support for related tables and subtype group layers. Done some extensions on the system download file so that the output from the workflow get map screenshot activity can basically channel straight into that file download. So it's super easy now to put a tool in your application that just saves a screenshot of the map as a local file. So I'm going to show you highlight generalization and a super first version of data linking. We're working really hard on getting some of the data linking stuff documented right now so that you also will be able to use it. Let's kick it off with highlight generalization. All right, so normally here we are in web. You do an identify or a search or something, and your features get highlighted, and that actually really wasn't very fast. Let's try it again. Generally speaking, it is quite fast. It doesn't take too long to put those highlights on. And if I zoom in and I have a really careful look at this, under normal geometry use cases, it does a pretty good job of tracking. However, some customers have really big and complicated polygons with a lot of vertices, and highlighting was doing some generalization for performance that wasn't always desirable. So I'm going to show you what we changed and kind of how it works. Just as soon as my token refreshes. So you've got some new stuff in here under the highlighting service around performance. So I haven't changed anything yet. This is still default settings. So if I click on this very complex polygon and it does its highlight focus, it looks okay at this scale, but as I begin to zoom in and I get into the details, you can really quickly start to see the generalization. We're really not tracking the border of that polygon as well as many of you would like us to. So what we've done is we've given you the ability to change how this works. The simplest thing to do if you're only ever highlighting one or two complex geometries is just to turn off any of the deviations in meters. And then when you do your selection, because I'm only doing one thing, it's still pretty fast. And as I get into the details of how this highlight tracks this edge, you will see that it is tracking it exactly. So a bunch of people were waiting for this. It's out. Little caveat, right? If you just come in and zero this out and then you go and you start trying to identify 1,000 really complex things, it's going to take some time. So this was here for performance, and when you zero that out, you're making a bit of a sacrifice. All right, let's talk about data linking. Data linking is now available, and I'm going to give you a super quick demo. Oh, I wish I had more time of this, just to introduce it, and then as you see it released, you can use documentation to get more information. All right, so data linking, what is it all about? It's about bringing data from other sources, spatial or non-spatial, into your application in a way that they don't need to be part of the actual geospatial data. That's the big idea. Where do we do it? You do it on the map layer extensions. So I'm going to work with water lines here. And when you get this new version, what you'll see is you got a brand new section here called data links. And I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new data link. I'm going to kind of show you the out of the box starting place. All our new data linking is done with workflow. So briefly, why workflow? Why did we go that way? In the GVH days, so GeoCortex Essentials, GeoCortex Viewer for HTML5, we had a server and we had a client and they talked to each other. Now, web is 100% client. There is no server. And since one of the more common use cases for data linking is to go out and talk to an SQL database, we don't have a path to do that from a client-side app that's running in the browser. So we recognized early on we were going to need to create a pattern that used workflow. And then when we did that, we realized, okay, that's great. We need to make that really clear how you do this with an SQL database, but it opens up the field quite a bit because you can now use client-side, you can talk to API services, any web API service, in fact. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new workflow. We've given you a brand new featured data linking sample data link, and I'm not yet even going to open that workflow and show it to you. I'll just show you what happens. So now if I click on this water line, you will see I've got this new sample data link that has come back. It's gone out to the workflow, it's come back, and it's going to present me something. And that something is not very exciting. In fact, it looks downright bare. So why? Well, because what we've done is we have given you, let me find my data link here. Here it is. We've given you all the kind of default containers. So all the defaults, so you don't have to wire this up yourself to get that input, to create a value for it, to then start to come in here and create a value, run it, and then you'll see in this middle part here, this is a placeholder. This is where you're going to go away and get a hold of what it is that you want to talk to, whether that's from an SQL database or another service. And by default, just to kind of show you how it works, we're going out and we're talking with an endpoint. That endpoint is this buildings layer. And so if I actually want this to start to be interesting, because I know my data and because I'm the one that's setting up this data link, I need to actually do something. So here I am back in our very boring thing. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give a little pop-up title so that can be there. I'm gonna actually add some content to my pop-up. I'm gonna add some text. Retrieved from enterprise system XYZ. I'm not even going to correct my horrible spelling mistake. I'm going to choose to put that ahead of this, and then I'm actually going to now also add some fields. So again, this is coming from the data, so I have to know what the data in my SQL data or my service is. But we'll add full address, and I guess just to keep it interesting, let's go find one more. Let's use this municipality. Find the right spot. Oh no, I've lost. Here I am. So now, just with a few quick configuration changes, because this is already talking to some data, I can now at least see a title. I can drill in. I can see some of the text that I put in some of the fields. So the general big idea is you're going to wire in this workflow. That workflow is going to go out and talk to a data source somewhere. It might be an SQL database using Workflow Server. It might be a web REST endpoint somewhere. The big thing here, though, is everything we are looking at here is inside my data link configuration. So one-to-many is what we've currently delivered, but they can have geometries. There's some auto detection logic. You can add your own field extensions, as you just saw, including declaring things as unique keys. You have control over what shows up when you drill into this thing. You can add unique feature actions just for this linked data, as well as external links. So maybe you want a URL here that takes you to a web page representing that data in the external system. You can set your own icons. You can choose your field formatting. So we've given you quite a lot of configuration for the look and feel of this, and kind of a little bit cooking show here, just as a couple quick examples. Here is a few pre-configured things. So here is an example of data coming via a workflow from a server-side workflow from an SQL database. You can see I have a custom icon here. As I drill into this data, I can see the data coming back. Okay, that's fine. Let's look at another example that is a client-side data link. Put a different icon, different title here. And then, I've got an image, I've got some links, I've got some features. So you really now can take data from anywhere and make it appear to your end users like it is a related table. That is the gist behind data links. I'm going to stop the demo there, even though I know there's more I could show because I got more to do. All right, future stuff. Let's talk about future. First of all, future workflow. A couple things we're working on right now for workflow. I mean, there's always things we're working on for workflow, but we are going to be updating the sandbox in Workflow Designer to use VertiGIS Studio Web. Today, it's using kind of its own flavor of something, and that creates all kinds of interesting situations where, why does it work this way here and this way here? So it is moving toward Workflow Web. And if you are someone who creates custom form elements in Workflow, we are actually going to be improving some of the experience around working with those inside Workflow Designer. So today, you basically add a custom form item that doesn't really show you anything, and then you have to know what it's called, know the key, do all this stuff. Whereas what you're going to be is basically see that custom form element as just a form element that you can interact with, is the direction we're going there. I told you I would tell you more about where we're going with Experience Builder. So what you're going to see is some improvements between Workflow widget in Experience Builder and existing first-party Experience Builder widgets. So I want to run a workflow that just passes data over to this existing first-party Experience Builder widget. You will have the ability to do that. And we will also be creating an integration widget for Experience Builder for VertiGIS Studio Search. Analytics, where are we going with analytics? I'm so glad you asked. Here we go. Future, now I put this in quotes. We're working on, in earnest, the alarms subsystem. What does that mean though? Because it can be misleading. You will be able to specifically monitor things. So not just an exploratory dashboard of what's going on in my GIS infrastructure, but I actually want to pay attention to this map service or this CPU and be able to set some boundaries and some rules for monitoring that specific thing. You then, of course, need visualization for that. When I'm looking at a chart, how do I see what I'm monitoring and whether there are boundaries set and whether I'm inside or outside of those boundaries? And if I am outside of those boundaries and I'm in the analytics interface, how are you going to draw my attention to the fact that something somewhere is outside those boundaries? And then lastly, in some cases, not always, I may want to notify someone if we are outside those boundaries. So choosing if you are notifying and how that works is part of this whole subsystem as well. So that's a big one. We've been working on that like hours and hours trying to figure out how it should work. not making it too complicated, but making it very, very effective. So that is coming. It's going to be a little bit, but it is coming. We're also adding some filtering controls on panel views. And this is just all about, hey, it's great that I've got this data here and I can see that some number of users experienced errors when they were trying to download this. Assuming you've got it all turned on and you've notified your users that you're collecting this data, we want to give the ability to slice down. It's actually Bob that's experiencing download errors. Let's go figure out why Bob is having problems. So getting down to a much more sliced version of data. You can anticipate these features sometime in Q2, and when we release these two features, from our point of view, VertiGIS Studio Analytics is ready for launch. So it's available today, it's a real product today, but we haven't done a big market launch and a big market push around it. You will be seeing that in Q2 of this year at the 1.2 release when these features are available. Let's talk about printing. I know many of you have been waiting for this new print engine that we have talked about. This slide looks disturbingly similar to the last time I showed it. Last time I said the new printing engine work was largely complete. Now I can say it is in fact complete. And last time I told you that the first PRs were under review for integrating that engine into VertiGIS Studio Printing. And that is true. They were underway. They are happening. It's slow going, but we are working on it. I will give you an update on an ETA on this soon, but it's just, it takes what it takes right now. Behind the scenes, we've got to make this work and we have to make it work really, really well. So that's not a very exciting update. So I thought I would show you something a little bit more exciting around printing. So let's talk about something we've talked about in the past, but this is getting closer and closer all the time. There is coming a version of, or a way to take VertiGIS Studio Workflow, VertiGIS Studio Printing, and VertiGIS Studio Reporting and bring those into ArcGIS Pro. We haven't given this an official name yet, so I don't even know quite what to call it. VertiGIS Studio Desktop, until we come up with a better name. Many of these things are in beta right now. In fact, I'm sure there's some people on the call today that are participating in some of the early betas around this. What does workflow in Pro look like? What is that experience like, printing and the like? But I just wanted to call out for you a couple examples specifically around VertiGIS Studio Printing inside ArcGIS Pro. So yes, look, this is VertiGIS Studio Printing and it is inside ArcGIS Pro. If you're familiar with Pro, you can see that you've got some toolbox widgets that are giving you access to new things that you couldn't do before. You're seeing a printing creation interface, the layout, all of it right inside Pro. One could say, okay, well, I could do most of that in web before, and, you know, in my web application or with VertiGIS Studio Printing. So why am I interested in this in Pro? Well, this is where some of the new stuff that's available in the engine and combining that with Pro starts to get interesting. So yes, you can do standard template-based prints, but we are also doing things like infinite prints where your page sizes are adapted to your specific output types. And this one I think is even more interesting. Multi-page prints are coming. Being able to go along a line, so I don't know if you can really see the colors here, but we're moving along a line and there's all these green rectangles. Each one of those green rectangles represents an individual print that will be put together into a multi-page print book or grid-based or time series. And so these are features that will be released with the ArcGIS Pro version of VertiGIS Studio Printing on release. And I am really hoping that we will bring those same features to you through VertiGIS Studio Printing. But right now I'm just focused on getting that engine integrated and then we'll look at the future from there. But I just thought I'd give you a bit of a sneak peek there because we've been talking about this for a long time, but you haven't seen, well, why do I care? This is part of why you care. Future stuff for mobile. Big thing, just wanted to call out, the team here in Victoria has been looking really hard at the new ArcGIS Maps SDK 200. otherwise known as Esri's ArcGIS Runtime Maui. We've done our investigation end to end. We know what we need to do. We know what it'll take. We've already begun some of the work where we need to change some of our behind the scenes patterns to align with new patterns in the new API. We're at a bit of a roadblock currently. There are some third-party libraries that are used in VertiGIS Studio Mobile that don't have support yet for this new ArcGIS Maps SDK 200. We're talking to them. We're trying to figure out if there's alternatives to those libraries that we're using, etc. So what does all that mean to you? Yes, we are planning a future release of mobile that will be based on ArcGIS Maps SDK 200. So if it comes up in conversation, if someone's asking you, hey, what about that new Esri ArcGIS Runtime Maui thing? First of all, you can say, oh, don't you mean the ArcGIS Maps SDK 200? But then once you get past that, you can explain that yes, VertiGIS Studio Mobile is moving in that direction. And when we can do it without taking away any functionality from you, we absolutely will. Search 1.0 is coming soon, but what is coming beyond 1.0? So the big thing, I spoke to this briefly, is out of the box integration between VertiGIS Studio Web and VertiGIS Studio Search, both for the configuration and for the end use interface. Got some great plans for how we're going to do this to make it really simple, and obviously the experience to the end user in web needs to show suggestions, and I mean, it's going to be great. And we've already started on this, so it is coming. There will be a search widget for ArcGIS Experience Builder, which I touched on briefly, and additional configuration in Search Designer for detecting and reindexing deltas. That was always part of our promise to you when we released VertiGIS Studio Search, and it is, prime time. You will have delta indexing strategies. You don't always want to reindex all of your data. All the plumbing is in place for this, but there's still a little bit more work to do. We also need to give you a pattern for using the SaaS version of Search with on-premise enterprise portal data. We don't have a pattern for that yet. We're working on it. We think that pattern is probably going to require your portal and your map services to be publicly accessible. So just as kind of a first information, if you're really wanting to use the SaaS search, but you're wanting on-prem data, you need to think through, are you willing to make that data accessible to that SaaS search engine? These future things are not going to take a long time to be delivered. We're talking about the next 2 months and then 4 months, a couple of releases. Similar to VertiGIS Studio Analytics, we are anticipating a Q2 market launch of Search. So that's when we're going to really make a lot of noise about it in the market. These features will be in place. Somebody that's never heard of Search before, that's like, oh, I'd like to try that. The integration is already there with web, etc. So that is what's coming. We are getting close to the end. Thank you for bearing with me. Web, what is coming in web? Some of this I've already spoken to in terms of arriving soon. I did add a couple of additional pieces there, but what are we working on? What are the big in progress things for web? Yes, we are working on the query tool, filter tool, not just the design and the mockups, which we had been working on, but actual code is in progress now on that tool. We are also working on, and again, some of you helped me and gave me feedback on a project sharing system that is also being worked on in code. There is, hiding in here somewhere, symbolization for points, which is something that comes up a lot. I see it in the community, people, hey, why can't I symbolize my points? Great question. That is coming quite soon, and that will unlock a couple of other things, including more of a wizard-like experience when you're bringing CSV or SLXS or shapefile data into web via a file. In GVH, you have this really slick wizard that kind of walked you through that step by step, and we're going to be emulating that kind of experience. We're also working on some lower level sketching hooks. This will be great for more advanced editing use cases where you want to change what the sketching looks like depending on where your cursor is. If it's over a water feature, then no, you can't go there. If it's not, then yes, you can, things like that. And a layer list filter. which I know is another thing many of you have been asking for. So these things are all very much in progress to be delivered either in the April release or in the June release, depending on, some of them will definitely be in the April release, some of them won't be available until the June release. So that is what is coming on web. Here is the current view of our release calendar. Really only one or two quick things to point out. I already talked about market launch of analytics in Q2 and market launch of search in Q2. So those are the market launch releases version of those. You will see reporting and printing, the cadence slowed down ever so slightly. That was mostly because there's just, other than the engine integration, there's not a lot going on in terms of new features or even a lot of bug fixing to do on those products. And so releasing them every 2 months was creating a bit more overhead than we thought was necessary, considering how much was going into those releases. So slowed that down a tiny bit, but you will still see regular releases on those two products. And with that, I think we are at the end. I just want to say again, a big thank you to everyone who patiently waited for this to start. Glad we were able to get past our technical difficulties. As always, I usually do some live questions. Considering how far behind we are, I won't do that today, but I do, I hope, a really good job of personally getting back to each and every person that asks a question. So if there are a bunch of questions in chat, you can expect to see an email from me, probably not today, but probably tomorrow. So thank you everyone for being here. Super appreciate your time. Really looking forward to seeing you at an event in the near future. We will be down at both the Esri Partner Conference and the Dev Summit in March. So if you're going to be at those events, there will be a few VertiGIS folk at each of those two events, and maybe we'll bump into each other. With that, I will let you go. Thanks again. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. Have a great day.